The attack was planned for the exact place I was supposed to stand. Not near it. Not later. Not around it. Exactly there. My security was ready. My intelligence was solid. My schedule was perfect. And that perfect schedule would have taken me straight into the line of fire. What saved my life was not more protection. It was one decision to stop. I speak to you today not as a symbol of power, not as a title, not as a position, but as a man who learned, slowly and painfully, that leadership can train you to move so fast that you forget how to listen. For most of my life, I believed leadership meant motion. If you are responsible, you move. If you care, you show up. If you are serious, you stay visible. If you hesitate, you fall behind. That belief is deeply respected in the world I come from. It is also deeply respected in yours. Yet in America, you celebrate initiative. You admire decisiveness. You reward leaders who act quickly, speak confidently, and stay constantly engaged. So did I. I learned very early that stillness looks dangerous in leadership. Silence looks unprepared. Rest looks like weakness. And stopping, especially when people depend on you, feels irresponsible. My days were filled before they even began. Briefings, reports, emergency calls, diplomatic pressure, security updates. My nights rarely rested long enough to become real rest. I told myself this was sacrifice. I told myself this was service. I told myself this was what leadership demanded. And I believed it. I believed a nation could not afford a leader who slowed down. I believed people needed to see me out. I believed presence created confidence. I believed movement created stability. Yes, I believed urgency was proof of commitment. Over time, something quietly formed inside me. An unspoken rule. If something matters, you do not stop. If lives are at stake, you do not pause. If responsibility is heavy, you carry it faster. That rule sounded mature. It sounded professional. It sounded like strength. But it created something I did not recognize at first. It trained my body to stay alert, but it trained my soul to stay deaf. Because when your life is built around constant response, you stop noticing the difference between what is urgent and what is important. You stop noticing the difference between pressure and instruction. You stop noticing the difference between leadership and control. I did not think of myself as someone who ignored God. I prayed. I asked for protection. I asked for wisdom. And I asked for clarity in difficult decisions. But I had quietly built one exception into my faith. I trusted God with outcomes. I trusted Him with danger. I trusted Him with uncertainty. I did not trust Him with my schedule. And I did not realize how much of my identity was hiding inside that schedule. To me, leadership meant being present at every critical moment. It meant showing strength by staying visible. It meant proving responsibility through constant availability. I never questioned that belief until one ordinary morning forced me to. That morning began like every other critical day. Before sunrise, my phone had already delivered its first updates. Security reports, regional movements, operational timelines. A high-level military briefing had been scheduled in the north, most near a sensitive area where armed groups constantly test our defenses. The route had been approved. The convoy was ready. Every detail had been reviewed. Nothing about the day suggested interruption. Nothing, except one small detail on my personal calendar. It was not an official document. It was not reviewed by staff. It was not part of any national schedule. It belonged only to my conscience. A single date was circled in red. The Sabbath. Weeks earlier, late at night, exhausted and almost ready to cancel a time of prayer because I felt I could not afford silence, I had made a promise. Not to an institution, not to a church, not to public expectation, to Jesus Christ, a simple promise. When the Sabbath comes, I will stop, not negotiate, not delay, not explain. Stop. That morning, standing in my office with documents in my hands and engines running outside, I noticed the red circle again. And for a moment, it felt strangely out of place. The nation needed leadership. The military expected my presence. The situation was real. The threat was not theoretical. In your country, in mine, and in every nation that carries responsibility, leaders are trained to believe one thing above all else. You do not step back on critical days. I felt the pressure immediately. Not from people, not from advisors, from inside myself. My mind responded exactly the way it had been trained to respond. This is not the time. This is not practical. This is not responsible. God understands emergencies. That sentence appeared in my thoughts so easily that it almost sounded spiritual. I began building my case silently. Oh, the situation is unstable. Morale matters. Presence matters. Timing matters. If I delay this visit, people will question leadership. Commanders will feel uncertainty. Enemies may read hesitation. Every argument sounded reasonable. Every argument sounded mature. Every argument sounded like leadership. But underneath the noise, another voice remained. Quiet, unemotional, unimpressed by my logic. You promised. Not to men, not to voters, not to history. To me. I realized something uncomfortable in that moment. I had no problem asking God to protect my soldiers. I had no hesitation asking Him to guide my decisions. I had no difficulty asking Him to give me strength. But stopping for Him felt different. Stopping felt like losing control. And control is something leadership quietly teaches you to love. Trust is easy when it does not interfere with your authority. Trust is easy when it supports your plans. Trust is easy when it strengthens your position. But trust becomes real only when obedience costs something. That morning, obedience would cost me certainty. It would cost me image. It would cost me the comfort of being visibly in charge. It would cost me the illusion that everything depended on my presence. I sat down slowly and placed the documents back on the desk. My hands felt heavier than they should have. Not because the decision was complicated, because it was clear. I knew exactly what was expected of me as a leader, and I knew exactly what was being asked of me as a believer. Those two expectations were no longer aligned. I looked out the window. Below, the convoy waited, engines running, and security units in position, men ready to follow me into danger without hesitation. My chest tightened. Leadership trains you to believe that people draw confidence from your presence. That is often true. But that morning I was being asked a different question. Not, will they feel confident if you go? But, who do you believe is truly carrying what you cannot control? I whispered a prayer that was neither eloquent nor dramatic. Lord, if I go believing I am needed. If I stay believing you are. There was no voice, no sign, no instruction, only peace. And peace does not argue, it settles. I picked up the phone. I called my chief aide. I postponed the visit. No speech, no explanation, no spiritual language, only a calm, professional instruction. On the other end of the line, I could hear confusion. Oh, I understood it. Because I felt it too. But when the call ended, something unexpected happened. The pressure lifted, not because danger disappeared, but because the struggle ended. The decision was made. For the first time in a long while, I did not measure the day by urgency. I chose the Sabbath. At that moment, it felt small, almost invisible, and I had no idea that this quiet decision would be the first step away from death. Once the decision was made, the real test began. Obedience rarely feels dramatic in the moment. It usually feels exposed. The convoy dispersed. The movement outside my office slowly faded. Messages began traveling through channels I could not see. I remained, alone. In leadership, silence is uncomfortable. You are trained to fill it. You are trained to manage it. You are trained to respond to it. Oh, but that morning, silence was not something that happened to me. It was something I chose. I closed the door. No advisors, no briefings, no screens, no updates. That alone felt unnatural. For years, I had trained myself to respond instantly, to stay reachable, to stay informed, to stay involved. Silence felt like negligence, but silence, when chosen intentionally, becomes a language. I opened the scriptures, not to prepare a speech, not to search for a message to deliver, and not to find something inspirational to quote, only to listen. The words did not rush me. They did not flatter me. They did not reinforce my position. They reminded me of something leadership culture rarely teaches. Authority without submission slowly becomes dangerous, even when intentions are good. I prayed again, not for safety, not for success, not for favorable outcomes, only this. Lord, do not let me interfere with what you are already doing. That prayer felt different, less urgent, less demanding, more honest. Time passed. The sun climbed higher, and something deeply unsettling began to settle into my awareness. The day was moving forward without my involvement. The nation did not pause because I paused. The systems did not collapse because I stepped back. The world did not wait for my instructions. For many leaders, this realization is frightening. Not danger, irrelevance. We are trained to believe that our presence holds things together, that our visibility stabilizes situations, that our control prevents chaos. But when you stop long enough, you discover something quietly humbling. Much more is held together without you than you ever imagined. While I spent the morning reading slowly, thinking, praying, I resisted the urge to check reports. I resisted the instinct to follow events remotely. Trust is not partial. It does not allow constant supervision. As midday approached, a strange calm settled into my body. Not the calm of ignorance, the calm of surrender. Whatever would happen without my manipulation, and I did not yet know that forces were already moving. I did not know that plans had already been set in motion. I did not know that eyes were already watching roads I would normally travel. I did not know that my absence was already reshaping the day. All I knew was this. Once obedience is chosen, patience becomes part of the cost, and patience prepares the heart for truth. Whether that truth arrives gently or like a storm, I remember the sound of the phone before I remember the words. It cut through the quiet I had worked hard to protect. For a brief moment, I considered letting it ring, not out of fear, out of discipline. Because the Sabbath is not silence by accident. It is silence by choice. But leadership does not disappear when faith begins. Responsibility remains, even when control is released. I answered. The voice on the other end belonged to a senior military commander stationed near the area of our planned visit. He was not a man given to panic. He measured words carefully. He understood pressure. He understood what it means to speak to a head of state. This time his voice was different, tight, fast, strained. "Mr. President," he said, "we are under attack." There was no ceremony in his words, no attempt to soften the message. But in the background, faint but unmistakable, I could hear the sound of gunfire. Not clearly, but clearly enough. This was not a drill. This was not rumor. This was happening now. A coordinated assault had begun on military positions near the exact area where my briefing was originally scheduled. The timing was precise. The location was exact. The attackers knew the terrain. They knew the routines. They knew where attention would normally be focused. As he spoke, images formed in my mind without permission. The convoy, the route, the briefing site, the places where I would have stood, the moments where attention would have been divided. I forced myself to remain steady. I did not ask how serious the attack was. I did not ask whether I had been a specific target. Those questions no longer mattered. Instead, as I gave instructions, reinforce nearby units, secure civilian areas, protect communication lines, maintain operational discipline. The training did not disappear because faith was present. The soldier in me remained. Faith and responsibility did not compete. They worked together. When the call ended, I remained seated. There was no relief in my chest, no celebration, only a slow, quiet awareness rising inside me. This attack was not random. It was not opportunistic. It was planned. And it had been planned around a schedule that no longer included me. The hours that followed moved slowly, not because nothing was happening, but because everything important was happening far beyond my sight. When you are not physically present at the front, time stretches. Each minute feels heavier than it is. Each silence feels like information being withheld. I began to understand, more deeply than ever before, why leaders struggle to wait. Waiting removes the illusion of command. Short reports arrived at measured intervals, controlled language, clear priorities, no unnecessary emotion. The kind of communication you use when lives depend on accuracy, not drama. Our forces were responding with discipline. The attackers were organized, but not unstoppable. Units familiar with the terrain used elevation and cover. Communication lines held. Reinforcements arrived faster than expected. Not because of brilliance in a single moment, but because systems had been built quietly over time. Eventually, the update everyone waits for and fears arrived. The assault had been repelled. Some of the attackers were captured, and others withdrew across the border. Our losses were limited, painful, but not devastating. Lives had been preserved that could easily have been lost. When I heard those words, my body released its tension all at once. My shoulders dropped. My breathing slowed. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. This is the moment many people expect relief to become noise, celebration, victory. But what I felt was quieter. Gratitude. mixed with something deeper, awe, because the outcome was not only a military success, it was a revelation. Before the call ended, I asked one final question, a simple one that had been forming in my mind since the first report. Was the original meeting location part of the initial target zone? There was a brief pause, then the answer. Yes, Mr. President. Not nearby. Not later. It was there. The words were calm. Their meaning was not. If I had followed the original plan, I would have been there. Not observing, not visiting, standing. I ended the call. The room felt different. Not heavier. Fuller. As if truth had entered and refused to leave quietly. I remained seated for a long time. I did not reach for my phone. I did not speak. My eyes returned to the desk, to the calendar, to the red circle. It did not accuse me. It did not celebrate. It simply existed. And in that stillness, something shifted inside me. Not emotionally, structurally. I understood, not as a theory, not as theology, but as lived reality, that I had not avoided danger through intelligence. I had not outmaneuvered anyone. I had not read the situation better than trained professionals. I had been spared. Well, not because I was important, but because I was obedient. That truth dismantles a certain kind of pride very quickly. Leaders are trained to believe they survive because they are protected. That day taught me something far more unsettling. Protection is not always attached to position. Sometimes it is attached to restraint. I bowed my head, not ceremonially, not publicly, instinctively. At first there were no words. Gratitude often arrives before language. When words did come, they were simple. Thank you. Not for power, not for victory, not even for safety alone, but for the warning I did not understand until it had already passed. I realized how easily faith can become performance, how often obedience is reduced to symbolism, how quietly we convince ourselves that form is enough. Much I had respected the Sabbath before. I had honored it when it fit conveniently inside my leadership life. But that day, I experienced its function. It was not merely a command to stop working. It was an intervention, a boundary I did not design, a protection I did not enforce, a shield created by obedience. I understood then why this moment felt different from every other narrow escape I had witnessed in my career. This was not about survival. It was about alignment. That was the moment I stopped seeing rest as a tradition and began seeing it as protection. There are moments in a person's life that divide everything into before and after. They do not always arrive with noise. They do not announce themselves with spectacle. Sometimes they come quietly, carrying a truth that changes the way you breathe. And that day became such a moment for me. Until then, life and death had been concepts I understood professionally, as a soldier, as a commander, as a head of state. I had studied risk. I had signed orders. I had stood beside families whose grief no policy can repair. But I had not stood so close to the edge myself. Not like this. Not personally. Not precisely. For the first time, the reality was unavoidable. The route, the timing, the meeting point, the attack. All of it had been designed around a version of the day that included me. Even if I had not been the intended target, I would have been exposed. Chaos does not discriminate. Violence does not pause for symbols, and proximity alone can become destiny. I saw clearly that death does not always come charging. Sometimes it waits, patiently, for you to follow your own plans. I had believed courage meant advancing, that leadership meant presence at all costs, that responsibility demanded forward motion. Those beliefs had served me well many times. That day, they would have ended me. The line between life and death was not drawn by strategy, not by intelligence, not by preparation. It was drawn by one decision that looked passive from the outside. I stopped. In the world we live in, stopping is often framed as weakness. Rest is treated as a luxury. Silence is mistaken for disengagement. We admire people who never slow down, never step back, never pause. But life does not honor speed alone. It honors alignment. That day taught me something leadership culture rarely rewards. Obedience can be more decisive than action. Yet restraint can be more powerful than force. Faith is not an escape from responsibility. It is a recalibration of it. I began to understand that many people do not fall because they are careless. They fall because they refuse to listen when wisdom asks them to pause. They move forward because movement feels safe. They press on because stopping feels irresponsible. Yet sometimes, stopping is the only responsible choice. For me, that day, it became a line of mercy. A moment where heaven quietly said, "Not today." After that day, the Sabbath was no longer something I approached lightly. Before, I respected it. I acknowledged it. I tried to honor it when leadership allowed space for it. But like many people in responsibility, I quietly believed that exceptional pressure justified exceptional exceptions. While that belief did not survive, I began to see the Sabbath not as a restriction, but as communication. Not a rule, but an invitation. An invitation to step aside long enough to see what continues without me. The Sabbath did not weaken my leadership. It clarified it. When you stop regularly, you begin to notice patterns you miss in constant motion. You learn which urgencies are real and which are produced by fear. You learn that not every call requires an immediate answer, and not every crisis belongs to you. I also began to understand something deeper. The Sabbath was never really about one day. It was about trust that extends beyond the calendar. Trust that a nation does not collapse when I rest. Trust that enemies do not gain power when I obey. Trust that God works without asking my permission. Well, that trust reshaped the way I prayed. I stopped asking God to bless my plans. I started asking Him to correct them. I stopped demanding outcomes. I started offering availability. The Sabbath became a weekly reminder that leadership is stewardship, not ownership. The country is not mine. The people are not mine. Even my life is not mine in the way I once assumed. Many of the world's crises, I believe, are not caused by ignorance. They are caused by exhaustion. Tired leaders make loud decisions. Worn minds choose speed over wisdom. Burned-out hearts confuse control with strength. The Sabbath interrupts that cycle. It forces you to face who you are when you are no longer producing, commanding, or reacting. It exposes whether your identity is rooted in purpose or in performance. From that point forward, I treated rest as protection, not superstition, not tradition, protection born of obedience. It did not remove threats. It did not promise ease. But it placed my life inside a rhythm older and wiser than any strategy I could design. And I understood why so many resist it. Rest requires surrender, and surrender is the hardest discipline of all. For many years, I believed that results justified methods, that outcomes validated decisions, that success proved alignment. These ideas are common in leadership culture. They are rewarded. They are celebrated. They are also dangerous. That day taught me something I had never learned in any military academy or leadership program. Obedience does not guarantee the result you want. It guarantees the result God allows, and those two are not always the same. And I began to examine my decisions differently, not by asking, "Will this work?" but by asking, "Is this faithful?" Not by asking, "Will this protect my position?" but by asking, "Does this honor God?" This shift was uncomfortable. It removed shortcuts. It exposed motives I preferred not to examine. It forced me to admit that some of my urgency was not driven by responsibility. It was driven by fear. Doing everything for the name of God does not mean attaching His name to your plans. It means being willing to let your plans fail if they do not align with His will. Leaving results in God's hands does not mean abandoning effort. It means refusing to manipulate outcomes through compromise. I learned that control is addictive. Leaders are praised for controlling narratives, situations, and people. But control is not the same as responsibility. Responsibility answers to something higher. Control answers only to itself. When you release results to God, you accept that success may look different than expected. You accept that obedience may cost you reputation. You accept that some victories will never be visible. That acceptance brings freedom. Freedom from panic. Freedom from comparison. Freedom from the exhausting need to prove yourself. I stopped measuring my days by productivity alone. I started measuring them by alignment. Did I listen? Did I act honestly? Did I stop when I was told to stop? This way of leading did not make leadership easier. It made it cleaner. And once clarity is tasted, it becomes difficult to surrender. I speak now not only as someone who survived a dangerous moment, but as a fellow leader who understands the invisible weight you carry. Whether you lead a nation, a company, a classroom, a community, a church, a family, or only your own conscience, your decisions quietly shape the lives of others. In the United States, leadership is often associated with strength, speed, and certainty. You admire those who act quickly. You trust those who speak clearly. You celebrate those who project confidence. Those qualities can be useful, but they are not protection. Power gives you access. Authority gives you reach. Visibility gives you influence. None of them give you safety. That illusion is one of the most dangerous inheritances leaders receive. I have sat in rooms where a single sentence changed thousands of lives. I have watched intelligent people speak with great confidence while ignoring quiet wisdom. I have watched capable leaders rush forward because slowing down felt weak. Leadership culture rewards momentum. God rewards obedience. A leader may command resources, manage complex systems, and influence history. But when God is not placed first, that leader becomes vulnerable in ways no security plan can detect. Pride announces itself as certainty. Humility listens. When you place God first, you do not lose authority. You gain perspective. You stop confusing your role with your identity. You stop believing that everything rests on your shoulders. This truth is uncomfortable. No leader is indispensable. No position is permanent. No legacy survives disobedience. And history is filled with powerful people who fell not because they lacked intelligence, but because they refused restraint. They believed urgency excused disobedience. They believed necessity overruled humility. It does not. Leadership is safest when it kneels, not publicly for performance, privately for alignment. God does not require dramatic gestures. He requires listening hearts. To every leader facing pressure, competition, and constant urgency, especially in a culture that rewards speed, learn the courage of pause. It may protect you more than any strategy you design. For most of my career, I believed protection came from preparation. Weapons, training, intelligence, planning. These things matter. They are necessary. Any leader who ignores them is reckless. But that day taught me something no security briefing had ever taught me. Power can delay danger. Obedience can redirect it. That morning, I had security, skilled professionals, armored vehicles, surveillance, multiple contingency plans layered on top of one another. On paper, I was well protected. But all of that protection was built around one silent assumption. I would be there. When that assumption failed, the danger lost its target. This is not a criticism of security. It is a reminder of its limits. No system can protect you from what you cannot see coming. No strategy can counter what was never revealed to you. Obedience works differently. It does not shield you inside the same path. It removes you from the path entirely. The higher a leader rises, the more predictable his movements become. No schedules tighten, patterns form. Routines are studied patiently by people who do not need to hurry. Power announces itself. Obedience moves quietly. That day, obedience made me invisible. Not heroic, not clever. Invisible. And there is a strange safety in that. Security teams can protect you from physical threats. They cannot protect you from arrogance. Intelligence can warn you about enemies. It cannot warn you when your own plans are leading you into danger. True strength is not only projection. Sometimes it is restraint. Power builds walls. Obedience changes direction. When God asks you to stop, He is not weakening you. He is repositioning you. And repositioning can save your life in ways force never could. There are moments when God does not ask you to advance. He does not open new doors. But He does not give fresh instructions. He does not explain Himself. He simply asks you to stop. For a leader, this may be the most difficult command of all. We are trained to associate movement with responsibility, progress with action, stillness with failure. When nothing moves, we feel exposed. But that day taught me something that reshaped how I understand timing. When God asks you to stop, He is not slowing your destiny. He is protecting it. Looking back, I can see clearly that my instinct to move forward would have carried me directly into danger I could not see. Not because I was careless, not because I was unprepared, but because I did not have access to the full picture. God did. Stopping that morning did not delay the work of the nation. The military responded. The systems functioned. Leadership continued. But what stopped was only one thing: me. And that was enough. Salvation does not always arrive as rescue. Sometimes it arrives as restraint. A postponed meeting, a canceled trip, a closed door, a quiet insistence that you rest when everything inside you says move. We often pray for God to remove danger. Sometimes He removes us instead. That truth humbled me deeply. I realized how many tragedies we call unavoidable were preceded by gentle warnings. Not dramatic signs, not loud alarms, quiet invitations to pause. God's mercy is not always loud. Sometimes it whispers, "Not today." To fathers and mothers raising children in a fast and demanding world, your example will speak longer than your instructions. Show your children that rest is not weakness. Show them that silence is not failure. And show them that faith is not decoration for difficult moments, but direction for daily life. To those who lead quietly, teachers, pastors, small business owners, caregivers, and community leaders, do not underestimate how deeply your rhythm shapes the people who follow you. You may never stand behind a podium. You may never make national decisions. But the way you choose to stop, to listen, and to honor God in ordinary pressure will form more hearts than any speech ever could. And to those who have drifted from God because life became too heavy, because responsibility became overwhelming, because disappointment slowly replaced hope, hear this clearly. God is not waiting for you to become strong again. He is waiting for you to return. Stopping is not defeat. Slowing down is not failure. Turning back is not weakness, and it is alignment. The world is tired. You can feel it in politics. You can feel it in business. You can feel it in families. You can feel it in yourself. Too much noise. Too much urgency. Too many voices. Too little listening. We are surrounded by information and starving for wisdom. We have mistaken movement for progress. We have mistaken control for strength. We have mistaken success for protection. God does not ask us to abandon responsibility. He asks us to remember who truly carries it. To the leaders of nations, communities, and institutions, I say this gently and firmly. Your position cannot protect you. Your strategies cannot see everything. Your authority cannot replace obedience. When God tells you to stop, do not argue with urgency. Do not negotiate with fear. Stop. To those who carry influence, whether publicly or quietly, remember this. The world does not need louder leaders. It needs humbler ones. It does not need faster decisions. It needs wiser pauses. I wish peace for Africa. Not the fragile silence that follows violence, but the deeper peace that grows from justice, restraint, and moral clarity. I wish peace for the United States. Not a peace built on dominance, but a peace rooted in responsibility, conscience, and humility. And I wish this for you personally. May you learn to stop when you are warned. May you listen when silence speaks. May you choose obedience when pride demands motion. I stand here today not because I was brave, but because I was obedient. And that is a truth worth sharing. The most important decision of your life may not be where you go next, but it may be the moment you finally choose to stop. Before you move on to your next video, your next meeting, your next decision, your next notification, I want to ask you something very simple. Where in your life are you being asked to stop, but keep choosing to move? Not because God has spoken clearly, but because stopping feels uncomfortable, because slowing down feels irresponsible, because silence feels risky, because your identity has quietly become tied to how needed you are. You do not need a title to be a leader. If your choices affect other people, you already are one. And the truth is this. The most dangerous pressure in your life may not be the threat in front of you. It may be the belief that you cannot afford to pause. If this story touched something in you, do not rush past that feeling. Sit with it. Must let it question you. Let it slow you down. And if you believe someone you love is living at a pace that is quietly destroying their peace, share this message with them. Not to convince them, not to correct them, only to give them permission to pause. Sometimes the most loving thing you can offer another person is not advice, but a moment of stillness. Before this video ends, I want to give you 10 seconds of silence. Not to be dramatic, not to be emotional, but to let one honest question surface. What is God asking you to stop? If you are willing, hold this simple prayer quietly in your heart. God, I do not ask you to make my plans succeed. I ask you to make my steps obedient. Show me where movement has replaced listening. Show me where control has replaced trust. And give me the courage to stop when stopping is your will. Amen.